Yeah.
My field of study is Arizona in women and women in politics. When you think about Arizona history, you kind of think about cowboys and Indians and those kinds of things. And women are really neglected in our state history. And as I was talking to John Talton a few minutes ago, you know, when I started down this road quite a few years ago and started digging around, there just weren't a lot of resources on women, but yet you hear names of women in Arizona politics all the time. And in fact, in 1998, if you recall, 5 women were elected to the top executive positions in Arizona, first in U.S. history. The national media called them the Fab Five. They were in People magazine and all the national publications. And U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor came back to her home state of Arizona to swear these women in, issue the oath of office. And one of those women included State Attorney General, newly elected Janet Napolitano, who was getting her first national attention. In addition to dominating state executive office, women held 37% of the seats in the Arizona legislature in 1998. The national average was only 20%. The New York Times weighed in on the subject, suggesting that Arizona's, quote, newness, open political system, and a certain gender-blind libertarian bent among the populace might have created this and contributed to the unusual number of elected female officials. But I found in my own research, decades before the Fab Five came into vogue, Arizona voters were sending women to elected office in higher than average numbers. Women were drawn to politics here early on because so many of them work. If you look at the 1900 census, only 15% of married women worked in the United States. In Arizona, the number was 43%, almost triple. Women here were much more likely to be widowed, divorced, abandoned, left to raise children on their own. And when you're in that position, you want a voice in government. And they demanded it fairly early on. They knew that workplace laws discriminated against school teachers that came out, were paid far less than men, even though their salaries were better than they were for women teaching school back east. That was still a step up. They were barred from jury service, so they couldn't have a jury of their peers. And poor women, abandoned women, divorced women, widows had very little economic protection. So women felt they were entitled to a voice, and they started to demand very early on in the 1880s a right to vote. But men, for decades in the state legislature, turned them down. Delegates to the state, and I will differ with Dan a little bit here, women did not get the right to vote with our state constitution. In fact, the suffrage leaders, led by Frances Willard Wise from Prescott, went to the state constitutional convention and demanded the right to vote. It was turned down to them because, quote, it was a dangerous and radical Willard Wise was perturbed, and she knew that she had a weapon, something the Constitutional Convention gave her, and that was the initiative. The initiative allowed her, in the summer of 1912, after we were a state, to go to the voters. And what they did, you know what it's like in the summer. They had to do this in the summer. And they did it mostly here in Maricopa County, right around the state capitol. They went out in 6 weeks and got 4,000 signatures on those petitions, which was not an easy thing to do back then when everyone left town, and this was a small city. She said, she was discussing with state politicians. She said, we soon found that although the majority was labeled progressive, that only a few were the genuine articles. The state's constitution was, by the standards of this day, quite progressive, but Frances Willard Wise, it didn't reach her high standards. It didn't give women the right to vote. So she went and built an unlikely coalition. When she got the initiative on the fall ballot, she went out and she worked with Mormons who were pro-women's suffrage, socialists, progressives, and in many of the state's more radical labor union organizers. She brought in Mexican-American leaders like Dr. Rosa Boydo from Tucson and John Lorenzo Hubble, who at that time was head of the Republican Party. And he told his followers that they should come out strongly for justice for women. Munz's coalition sailed through the state's male voters that fall of 1912. She won 68% of the popular vote. And that is the largest victory for suffrage vote in U.S. history. As she later said, the male voters and the male legislators were not exactly aligned in their beliefs, and that would be a recurring theme. Frances Munz ran for the state senate in 1914, and she won. After her election, she told reporters, "Our friends, the true blue conservatives, will be shocked to find a grandmother sitting in the state senate." Over the years, many other women followed her, and Arizona has consistently ranked among the highest number of women in elected office over the years. Now, those early female politicians, they were mostly white, Anglo, middle class, and they were mostly Democrats. Some were progressive like Munz, many were moderates, and there were a few conservatives as well. But these women were all bound together by legislation, by their interest in legislation that protected women and children. As the grandniece of one of the early female state legislators told me, she said, "These were not the women who stayed home and baked cookies. They went out, they organized, they joined women's clubs, because political parties were not always friendly to their interests, neither Democrat or Republican, and they had to create their own networks, women's networks, outside of the parties to get things done. They fought for labor laws. They fought to improve state schools. They passed the first widow's pension in the U.S. They demanded the right to serve on juries, which they did not win until after World War II. And they even championed the Equal Rights Amendment when it was first introduced in Congress in 1923 by Alice Paul. They investigated conditions in the state prison system, and they came back and reported to Governor Hunt that they felt that the shaved heads and the striped prison garb that the prisoners were wearing stigmatized prisoners, and they were eliminated. There was a certain current sheriff in that had brought the striped garb back into the road that was considered so barbaric by those residents 100 years ago. In 1916, Cochise County elected a Labor Democrat by the name of Rosa Boydo, and she went to the legislature with the backing of a strong coalition comprised of socialists and radical labor union members. If you remember, the busy deportation occurred in the summer of 1917. Rosa McKay was the county representative, and she went to the telegraph office in D.C. to telegraph President Wilson to tell him about what she believed was an illegal roundup of striking copper workers. Many of whom were Hispanic or European immigrants, and they were being taken out on railroad cars into the desert, and they were deported into New Mexico without further water. She was knocked down by gunmen. Many of her family members were beaten. Some people, one person at least died that day. She then, after the fact, organized women to collect needed supplies, take food and water to the 1,200 deportees in New Mexico. On her train ride back, she was shot at by vigilantes, and she had to flee Cochise County for her life. She moved to Hughes County, and there was re-elected to the legislature, continued to make great progress in the field of labor law, especially for minimum wage law for women in the 1920s. House of Representatives, Isabella Greenway was told by state leaders she probably shouldn't run. She was a woman, and that wasn't an appropriate job for a woman. Franklin Roosevelt told her, go for it. You wanted to run for governor and everything else. So she ran. She won 70% of the popular vote. So not exactly a failure, as Arizona politicians suggested. She worked to bring New Deal programs to the state, and she instituted programs to help World War I veterans. Her work as Democratic National Committee in Arizona, in my mind, really paved the way for dozens of other women over the years to enter politics, because she really encouraged them to run. One of them was attorney Lorna Lockwood, who couldn't even find a job as an attorney, couldn't find clients because she was a woman in the 1930s. She went on and was elected to the state legislature before gaining a seat in the Maricopa County Superior Court in 1950, the first woman judge in the state. She was instrumental there in overhauling the juvenile court system, and then went on to be elected to the state Supreme Court in 1960. In 1965, she became the first female Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in the United States. In 1967, Democratic Senator Carl Hayden threw her name into the ring for U.S. Supreme Court Justice. That year, of course, that position went to Thurgood Marshall, not Lorna Lockwood. She knocked down a lot of barriers for another certain woman, Sandra Day O'Connor, to achieve that role many years later. Before the Civil Rights Movement, women of color made only a few inroads in Arizona politics. There were several Mexican-American women that held county positions, school superintendent, county recorder early on. In 1916, Ella White led the Arizona Federation of Colored Women in a protest against the showing of the birth of the nation here in Phoenix. Of course, that was a very racist film. They gave a favorable view of the Ku Klux Klan. White went before the Phoenix City Commission, arguing that the film was historically inaccurate and created prejudice against her race. And she won. They banned the film. At the time, Arizona law permitted school segregations if municipalities voted for it. Phoenix was the school. Phoenix schools were segregated. In 1917, African-American women's groups fought for that for legislation to create the Carver High School to accommodate black children that were not being allowed to attend the Phoenix Union High Schools, and they worked successfully to integrate Arizona Teachers College, what we now call Arizona State University. In 1948, Ada Walker became the first African-American woman to unsuccessfully run for the legislature. Black women would not sit in the legislature until 1966. First Hispanic woman was elected in 73. And although demographic changes that Dan alluded to brought an end to democratic dominance in the 1950s and 60s, women continued to win office. By the time of the modern women's movement, many were experienced politicians poised to move up to higher office, setting the stage for other women. Karen English, Rose Mofford, Sandra Day O'Connor, Gabrielle Giffords, Kristen Sinema, and Janet Napolitano, just to mention a few. Those pioneering female politicians like Frances Willard Munns did not win all the battles, but they made some very astonishing progress in the most unlikely of places, Arizona.